Welcome, everybody. It is Doug Isenberg, and I'm excited to continue this series of interviews with important players in the domain name dispute industry. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking with two people from the Canadian International Internet Dispute Resolution Center, or the CIIDRC. And if that's the name that you don't instantly recognize, there may be a couple of reasons for it. First, the CIIDRC name itself is relatively new. It identifies the entity that was formerly known as the British Columbia International Commercial Arbitration Center, which is a division of the Vancouver International Arbitration Center. And second, although the CIIDRC has been providing domain name dispute services for the Canadian top-level domain name .ca for many years, it is the newest provider of UDRP services, having been approved by ICANN, which of course is the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, just in 2019. So my guest today will tell us a lot more about the CIIDRC's background and its inner workings, and also provide some advice about the UDRP in general and proceedings at their center in particular. So let me go right ahead and introduce them. First, Barry Penner is the managing director of the Vancouver International Arbitration Center. He previously served for 16 years as an elected member of the legislature in British Columbia, Canada, serving in a number of roles, including as the Attorney General for British Columbia. In the private sector, Barry previously worked for what is now DLA Piper Canada in their Vancouver office. And today, in addition to the hat that he is wearing with us here, Barry also operates an independent legal and public affairs advisory practice known as Penner Pacific Advisory Services. Next, Ina Ergasheva is the assistant director for the Vancouver International Arbitration Center and the CIIDRC in Vancouver. For more than a decade, Ina has been responsible for the administration of domestic and international commercial arbitrations, mediations and disputes under the underinsured motorist protection claims, as well as, of course, which is why she's here today, domain name disputes under the CDRP, the .ca dispute policy, as well as the UDRP now. So welcome to both of you, Barry and Ina, and I look forward to a great conversation about domain name disputes and the CIIDRC, and maybe we can get started by having you just explain a bit more about exactly what the CIIDRC is and how it fits into the puzzle of all of these other entities and acronyms that I've been describing. So, Barry, maybe we should start with you.
Sure, and thanks, Doug. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you for inviting us to your platform. You're really to be commended for your innovation and persistence in this sector. The CIIDRC, which is the acronym we prefer, it's a bit easier to say than Canadian International Internet Dispute Resolution Center. The CIIDRC has been around now for, it's going to be soon to be 2 years. But as you've noted, itself is a fully owned division or subsidiary of our parent entity, which has been around since 1986, originally launched as the British Columbia International Commercial Arbitration Center. Last year, we rebranded and renamed our parent organization as the Vancouver International Arbitration Center, just recognizing that globally, Vancouver is actually better known as a city and as a place to be than actually our province of British Columbia. That's something that we learned when we were hosting the Olympics and I was serving in our government. When we were marketing internationally, almost everyone knew about Whistler or Vancouver, but some people thought British Columbia was located somewhere in South America. So our board has taken that into account, and last year, as I mentioned, we've renamed our parent, Vancouver International Arbitration Center. And it is that parent that, as you noted, had been doing .ca disputes for many years, starting in about 2002 for the Canadian Internet Registry. So we had this experience already dealing with domain name disputes, and while the policies are somewhat different, there's also a lot of commonality. And it was actually Ina, who's on this call, who brought forward the idea before I joined the board and suggested to the board that we start exploring approaching ICANN to see if we couldn't take on UDRP disputes as well, noting that there were at that time, I think, just one other entity in the Western Hemisphere providing those services, and that's the forum. So thinking that it would perhaps be interesting to people in different jurisdictions to have an option, an additional option in the Western Hemisphere. So that's really what led to the creation of CIIDRC. And since then, we've taken on the .ca work as well as the UDRP work. But that's I guess a quick and dirty overview of our structure. The parent is the Vancouver International Arbitration Center, and CIIDRC is our wholly owned subsidiary that deals with domain name disputes.
Thanks, Barry. So, I mean, Ina, maybe you could explain a bit about the process of becoming a UDRP service provider, and there are currently 6 providers, and the UDRP itself came into play 22 years ago now, and so there are a number of providers. Why was the decision made to pursue this approval from ICANN, and what did it involve from your perspective?
Sure, Doug. And again, thank you for having us. And as just to continue on what Barry just expressed, originally British Columbia International Commercial Arbitration and now Vancouver International Commercial Arbitration Center has its ambition to have a global presence. Now, when it comes to domain name disputes, we dealt with domain name disputes .ca for close to 20 years, and it was really natural evolution to look and seek to offer broader services. And as you know perfectly well, that in 2016 there are new GTLDs were introduced, and so from a small group of GTLDs to have over 1,200 generic top-level domain names, and these are now available, and therefore it will result in a larger number of disputes. So this evolution was very natural. Now, another point was when you look at the map and the representation, there are 6, as you mentioned, 6 providers in the world, and they all are approved by ICANN. They're geographically, Western Hemisphere was presented only with 1 dispute resolution provider. One in Europe, there are 2 offices. Asia has 1 dispute resolution provider, which has several offices, and there is 1 in the Middle East. It seems like they proportionally, it made sense to have Western Hemisphere presented with another dispute resolution provider to cover time zone as well as other things. On top of this, when we dealt with .ca domain names, we saw, and especially in the banking sector, we saw our Canadian trademark owners had to file .ca domain name disputes with us, and then disputes related to .com, .net, .org with other dispute resolution providers. So it's all led to, it was very logical to pursue this this opportunity and to file. And it was quite a process. It took closer to 2 years. Vigorous application. There was a public consultations, number of comments, and eventually we were approved, and we are glad to be a part of the team. Absolutely, I would call it a team.
Yeah, and I should say, by the way, in full disclosure, that I am myself a member of the team as a panelist for the CIIDRC, and before that for .ca disputes at the predecessor entity. So it's interesting, the comment that you just made about Canadian entities having to file their UDRP complaints with a dispute provider outside of Canada. So I'm just curious, what has resulted in the past couple of years? I know CIIDRC is still relatively new, but is it turning out that most of the UDRP complaints that you are seeing are coming from Canadian trademark owners, or not?
Well,
I would say it's a mix, but go ahead, Ina.
So if you want the precise stats, so it is, as Barry said, it is a mix. Around 65% of our cases, and our caseload has not reached desired level yet. It's around 65% is filed by Canadian trademark owners, and hence 35 are from other countries.
Right. And is there any pattern to those other countries? Are they the United States or countries in Europe, or just a variety of other places around the world?
It's a variety. It's a mixture. We have European countries, trademark owners from Europe, from Russia. There are a few from the United States. So it's a mixture. It's a mixture. Anybody can file with any dispute resolution provider, because UDRP is the truly global dispute resolution tool for trademark owners.
Yeah, and if I recall, that's an excellent point. If I recall correctly, during the application process that you went through with ICANN, I don't remember any opposition to the application. I know it was a long, sort of rigorous process, but I think competition can certainly be seen as a good thing on the one hand. On the other hand, as you pointed out, all of the UDRP service providers are administering the same UDRP policy and the same UDRP rules. I know each provider has their own separate set of supplemental rules. So how, if at all, does the CIIDRC distinguish itself other than geographic location from any of the other UDRP providers?
Well, we did work hard on our supplemental rules. There was a lot of effort from board members and other volunteers that we reached out to that are experts in this subject. Our goal was to have a streamlined process, to keep it straightforward and simple and clean, in order to help distinguish ourselves and make us a service provider that people would want to use.
And I should say simple and clean is a great way to describe the CIIDRC website, which is a great resource, not only for the UDRP, but of course for the .ca Canadian dispute policy, as you mentioned. It's a very attractive, very, very useful website. Maybe for those who aren't familiar with it, Barry or Ina, either of you could maybe talk a little bit about what some of the content that's available to trademark owners who are considering filing complaints, or respondents who've had complaints filed against them. What sort of resources are available on your website to them?
I'll turn it over to Ina to comment in detail, but I'll just note again, our board actually is a very hands-on board, and so there's a committee that was formed, and together we worked very hard to come up with a design for our website. We didn't do the coding ourselves, thank goodness, but we hired a consulting firm in British Columbia that helped us and worked very closely with us. But it was a very iterative process, and our board members expressed some strong views about how our website should look and feel, so that it would be easy for people to navigate, because we're new. So people need to be able to quickly understand what we're offering and how to go about getting those services. And maybe with that said, I'll turn it to Ina, but I just encourage your viewers to take a look, if they have a moment. Point your browser to CIIDRC.org, and you'll be able to see what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So, as Barry said, we all worked really hard in committee. We almost worked around the clock on the contents to ensure that it is easy for the users to navigate through the policies. There is one misconception when it comes to UDRP. Sometimes there is a feeling that it's just a simple matter of filing. You will file, and that's enough. It's sufficient for to be successful in this administrative proceedings, but that's not the case, and you know it perfectly well. So what we created a guide to filing a complaint, a UDRP complaint, a guide to filing a CDRP complaint, which clearly identifies all the elements, which are three-part tests, and even though the policy CDRP is based on UDRP, they're not identical. There are some variations. So there are guides. There are also resources for respondents, the domain name owners, how to respond to UDRP complaint or CDRP complaint. We also have a graph, which is a graphic infographics, that's what it was designed to show the process and the flow and what's the stages, and it's a snapshot of the whole UDRP and CDRP process, and there are two separate pages. Now what else we have? We post articles on our website. We put together webinars, and that's what we'll continue to do in the future as well. And we are, on top of this, we are available by phone at any time. If there is a question, users can call us. But when it comes to the website, we also are very sensitive to any feedback. So whenever we hear back from whoever visited our website, and if there are any comments, we take it seriously and address it.
And of course, like all the providers, all of the decisions, as ICANN requires, under the UDRP are posted on your website, so anybody can take a look at them using the search tools that you offer, which is a great way. I know I sometimes lose perspective. I've been doing this work for so long as both a panelist under the UDRP and other policies, and as a representative for parties that I know I sometimes lose perspective, and I think that everybody knows all the ins and outs of these policies, but obviously every day, especially given the numbers, and we'll talk about that in a moment, that we're seeing for domain name disputes, somebody is filing or defending a UDRP complaint probably for the first time. But yeah, speaking of numbers, I've been tracking this for a while now and published this Domain Dispute Digest that collects some of the data for UDRP filings. And as you know, we're recording this now in April 2021. The number of domain name disputes across all the providers is at a record level. And that's a bit surprising. I would not have predicted that a year ago, as the world was entering this pandemic, that we'd actually see an increase in the number of UDRP filings. I think there's some various reasons for that. I've talked about it before, but I'm just curious, how, if at all, has the pandemic affected either the way CIIDRC is conducting business? We're all working from different locations and struggling to get work done. So how has it affected your operations? And I know you're still a young provider and don't have a large UDRP caseload. Can you attribute any changes on the caseload itself to the pandemic that we've been under for the past year?
When the government restrictions first started to bite, which was March of 2020 in Canada, we were concerned. What was this going to mean? At that point, CIIDRC was only about 6 months old, and we just did not know what it was going to mean for our overall operation, including our parent entity. But for CIIDRC, because we, from the outset, had tried to make as much of it be online as possible, we thought that actually that was quite fortunate, fortuitous for us, that we contemplated trying to make it involve as little administrative oversight in real time as possible, so that parties could just upload and hopefully get their information through our website. And so we didn't notice a big hiccup there. On the other part of our business, our parent entity doing arbitrations commercially and internationally, we were able to segue fairly quickly and fairly easy for me to say, but for the other parties, the parties using us, most of them were able to transition to platforms like Teams and Zoom for conducting their mediations and or arbitrations. Again, there was a bit of a pause as people kind of took a deep breath and figured out how are we going to do this, but the transition took place. And then within the office, where we operate out of Vancouver, we also had to keep in mind there were serious government restrictions about numbers of people in offices, and you had to come up with a workplace safety policy and post it and adhere to it. So we had to develop that, and we we made some investments in IT so staff could operate off-site if possible and still have access to all of our electronic records and so on. So we were able to pivot fairly quickly, and certainly more quickly than we've seen in courts, for example, in Canada, who have really struggled and are only kind of now getting their feet under them again. But we were able to make that transition in a couple of weeks. So even with our our domestic arbitration, international arbitrations, and mediations, that there's a bit of a hiccup, but that ended up going quite smoothly ultimately within a few months. And with the CIIDRC, I believe Ina will tell you that things are moving along pretty well. Ina?
Thank you, Barry. Yes, indeed, things are moving. We were fully open and operational during the last year time, and now, of course. In terms of the number of domain name disputes we see, it is on the rise. Last year we saw a larger number of complaints than in previous year, and arbitrations. So Barry didn't mention that we got a record number of arbitrations received. It was a milestone for the Vancouver International Arbitration Center. But in terms of the trend, if that's where you're leading, Doug, is since the pandemic. Yes?
No, I was just going to make clear for anybody who's watching who is not as familiar with the UDRP, it is fortunately entirely an online process. So the documents, everybody should know, are submitted electronically. There are no longer hard copy requirements, which there used to actually be in the UDRP in the past, but no longer exist today. So there are no in-person hearings or discovery or, of course, trials. So in a sense, the UDRP is very well suited to this work from home lockdown that we've all been in. And I know some people have speculated that may be, a part of the reason for the increase. I think there are a couple of reasons. Another one being that the cyber squatters themselves have had plenty of time and opportunities on their hands to come up with new ways to violate trademark owners' rights on the internet. I've certainly seen that with my clients. I said many times I'm not surprised by anything anymore. So I think from my perspective, those are a couple of the reasons why we've seen this sort of steady increase in domain name dispute filings over the past year and even in recent years.
Yes, indeed. As you mentioned, firstly, the UDRP is the perfectly fit tool for trademark owners when it comes to dispute resolution. It fits. It's everything is filed online. There are no exchange of physical copies, it is what's happening now with the lockdown, and everybody are now tied into the internet. The value of the domain name dispute is increased. So domain name dispute it's a property. It became a valuable asset and a commodity, as you perfectly know. The price for the domain names could be in millions. It's more than luxurious real estate. As you know, Las Vegas was sold for $90 million, and apparently there's still payments made in installments. And the Walmart purchased shoes.com, if I'm not mistaken, for also in millions, voice.com for $30 million, sex.com for $13 million, and so on and so forth. So the value of the domain names is on the rise. Therefore, those who wants to take a part of it, they end up in disputes. And UDRP is one of the best tools in helping trademark owners to protect their brands.
Right. So aside from the pandemic, are there any other trends that you're seeing? Again, I know it's a relatively small caseload, and you're a relatively young organization. But are there other types of issues that you have seen arise more recently in the UDRP, or for that matter, under the CDRP, the Canadian policy? Because I think a lot of the cyber squatters are engaged in a lot of the same activities, regardless of the top-level domain.
Indeed. When it comes to industry, fashion industry has been under the massive attack, and we see lots of cases under CDRP and UDRP, and trademark owners are related to fashion, and it seems like fashion industry went online for a while. So you no longer need to fly to Milan, Paris, or New York to buy something. You go online and you purchase your favorite dress or favorite suit, and here you go. And therefore, they've been attacked the highest. That's what we see from our stats. Banking sector is also affected, and there are other industry as well. But when it comes to the type of the fraudulent activities, of the mischief online, we see a little bit of everything. We see when the website trademark owners complain that their websites are redirected to pornographic sites. We see cases where there is a phishing, where the website that the domain name registrant owners they contact clients of the trademark owners and for the money or information phishing. So a little bit of everything is presented. Yes.
Right. What about sort of procedural issues? Because I know despite the great resources that you offer on the website, and I see this as a panelist all the time, sort of common mistakes that parties make in filing. So if you had some words of wisdom about how to avoid those mistakes, or what some of the most common mistakes are, any advice you can provide to anybody who's watching this?
Well, you do not take it lightly when it comes to filing in UDRP. Panel will decide the matter based on your complaint, and maybe there will be additional supplemental material requested by the panel, but the likelihood of it is very low. So whatever is filed, that's the panel will take into consideration. So when we see complaints where they're just allegations without any proof, and it simply stated that the registrant filed it in bad faith, and that's it. So evidence, as you know. And when the complaints are filed without any evidence, that they're not successful. Very often we see where, so one interesting trend, which also I found it's curious, it's important. When it comes to CDRP complaints, the majority of them, almost more than 90%, are filed by lawyers. So there are less problems with these complaints, with such complaints filed by lawyers, and therefore the outcome of the decisions is more than 90% are successful. But when it comes to UDRP complaints, what we see that there are lots of self-represented complainants, and they're lacking a lot of depth of knowledge and understanding of the UDRP and all the three elements, which have to be not just stated, they have to be proven. Very often we see when the complaint is filed under one name, yet the trademark registration is under a different name of the company. So there are certain things which are not helpful, and some complaints are not even eligible for the UDRP. So there are varieties of issues, and what we're working is to on the resources to allow to put as much as possible on our website, to include the information, and on our online platform, that whenever someone wants to file a UDRP complaint, and even if they want to do it on their own, they clearly understand what is required, and then it's up to them whether or not to hire help, to hire counsel to help them, assist them.
So it's a balance, sorry to interject, of providing clear information, but we're consciously trying not to overload. We don't want people to click on our website and immediately see a large textbook that they have to go through, because that would be daunting and counterproductive. So we are trying diligently to provide concise information so that unrepresented people can utilize our services through the website. But that said, and this will be somewhat self-serving because like you, Doug, I'm a lawyer, it as Ina says, we see that there are a lot fewer problems when people are represented or have some legal advice to help navigate. And something as simple as, what does the word evidence mean? To you and I, and to Ina, we know what that means. But what we found is some unrepresented people, they think evidence means just, I'm upset, I don't think it's fair. That constitutes evidence in some of the complaints we've received. And of course, it doesn't meet the bar of setting out a factual basis for a panel to make a finding. So those are a couple of the issues that we do see. And of course, there's a limited amount we can do because we're not going to provide legal advice per se. We try to set out what the guidelines are, but we can't really provide legal advice to individual people.
Right, and that's a question I was going to ask because I've, had the opportunity, if you will, as a panelist for a long time to see some pretty awful filings, and, whether they are lacking in facts or lacking in legal arguments or lacking in both. And it's important to remember that the panelist who is going to decide a case must rely on the case file. So if you, as a party, have not submitted that evidence or submitted that legal argument into the case file, do not assume that the panelist knows anything else or is going to conduct any his or her independent research, which may or may not be appropriate under certain circumstances. But my question, because Barry, that was an excellent point, is what happens when somebody files a document? Let's just say somebody files a complaint, makes conclusory allegations simply by repeating some of the elements of the UDRP, and simply makes a broad statement that says the domain name was registered in bad faith, sort of period. What then happens procedurally?
As you know, under UDRP, we providers have to review the complaint. And then to determine whether the complaint is in compliance, but it's not, we do not review the merits of the case. It's literally paragraph 3.2 under CDRP and I believe 3 under UDRP. These are specific points we review. But in cases where there's literally nothing, what we prepared is a deficiency letter. And under the UDRP and CDRP, the complainants have 5 days to remedy all instances of non-compliance with the policy. So this our deficiency letter references again to what has to be proven without getting into how to do it and into the specifics of the case, but is a skeleton of that's what the proper complaints should reflect, and that's what these elements have to be proven in order to succeed. And then it's up to in hands of the complainant. If they refile in the way it's refiled, then and they still want to proceed, it will end up in front of you or other panelists, and then you will decide on the matter. And as you know, there's still around, if I'm not mistaken, around 8% of the complaints which are denied. You're better when it comes to stats worldwide, but there is something like that. Am I correct?
Yeah. I think, and the numbers have varied a bit through the years and quarter by quarter. I know this past quarter I reported an increase overall in the transfer rate of domain names under the UDRP, but yes, it remains consistently high, somewhere in the ballpark of that 90% figure or so. But as I tell my trademark owner clients all the time, don't take anything for granted. when filing a UDRP complaint. This is not what we here in the United States would refer to as notice pleading. It's more like a motion for summary judgment. So the filing of the complaint, which may be the only document that's ever filed, needs to contain all of those factual and legal arguments. And let me ask this question because, I think citation to precedent in complaints and in responses is always important. I know under the .ca policy, the CDRP, there's, I believe, an express reference that it's appropriate to cite to other dispute policies that might be applicable, and so I've seen that happen quite frequently. Under the UDRP, I'm curious, is it appropriate to cite in filings at your center decisions under the UDRP from other service providers?
It's an excellent question. If we talk about the history of the UDRP, there are more than 70,000 cases. Therefore, and around that number of decisions are out there. To limit our decision makers to the not a large volume we've handled so far, that's not right. And of course, as you know, there is a WIPO overview, is a document prepared by WIPO, and WIPO was behind the creation of UDRP, and their team did a fabulous job where this overview has been referenced and cited in many decisions, and our panelists reference to this paper as well. It's became a holy book of UDRP. So yes, it's absolutely appropriate. And even though these are not precedents, other decisions, they're not precedents, but absolutely, whatever the panelist decides to do, it's in their competence to select decisions to cite.
Right. So while these other decisions may not be binding, they can be influential.
And speaking of panelists, one thing I guess that we haven't talked about is can you speak a little bit about the makeup of the CIIDRC's panelists, who are aside from myself, I'm not looking for names. I know the list is published on the website, but what type of person is a panelist for the center?
Well, first of all, we do look for a legal background. We want to see the work that you've done, that you demonstrate competency and knowledge in this subject area. And we have a committee of our board that vets all the applications to be on our roster. So again, we have a hands-on board of skilled people with diverse backgrounds, and we go through these applications carefully before approving someone to be on our roster. There is a list of qualifications on our CIIDRC website. If you look under, I think, About Us, you'll see some information there. So if you're interested in becoming a panelist or just want to know what it takes to become one, you can find that at CIIDRC.org.
Great. And by the way, of course, it went without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Other documents that are on that website that I think are extremely important for both CDRP and UDRP filings are model complaints and model responses. So as you said before, Barry, there's not a treatise available on the website. It would be a bit overwhelming. On the other hand, the model documents are not necessarily a fill in the blank. At least from my perspective, I look at them as a guide as to what is required. But this is a document, whether it's a complaint or a response, that should probably take a fair amount of time to complete properly.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was about to say we focus on taking it seriously when you're making a complaint, and don't just kind of throw it in and think that you've done your job. You have to be careful that you've actually met the requirements. But similarly, if you're on the receiving end and you're responding to a complaint, do that with deliberation. And make sure that you're covering off all the bases when you are responding.
And do it quickly because of the timeline that is imposed.
Don't ignore it.
UDRP.
Don't ignore it.
Right. And by the way, I should mention it's not just cyber squatters who have UDRP complaints or other domain name dispute complaints filed against them. I've seen plenty of cases in which large, well-known trademark owners have had complaints filed against them, perhaps because somebody's tried in vain to purchase a domain name from them that may be in their portfolio that's not being used. And in many of those cases, by the way, the UDRP is not really appropriate. We're just about out of time, but any other advice that you'd like to provide to parties who are thinking of filing or have had a complaint filed against them at the CIIDRC, or anything else we should know about your operations?
Mm-hmm. Advice would be, if you have a question, call us. And we are available. This one of our signatures is to provide a support. So please call us or visit our website, CIIDRC.com, or call us at 604-684-2821.
Now, you'll notice Ina said .com, and of course our domain name is registered at .org.
.org.
And
Here it is.
.com, .org, and .ca will all direct.
.ca, yes.
Will all direct to the same place.
All direct to the same place.
Sounds like somebody
Yes.
knows something about domain names.
Indeed.
Barry, any final words?
No, that was excellent advice from Ina. That yes, we have helpful staff standing by during regular business hours. We're of course in the Pacific time zone, but we will get back to you within 24 hours if you leave a message for us.
Great. Well, Barry, Ina, I thank you both for taking time out of your day to talk about the CIIDRC, and you provided a lot of helpful information. So thank you both.
Thank you, Doug, for having us.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks.